Welcome to the Hope for the Journey podcast, a weekday wellness tips program presented by Dr. Denise Marie, Third Order Carmelite. Dr. Denise is a professionally qualified clinical psychologist, health and wellness professor and coach, counselor, plus medicinal herbs educator. Each Hope for the Journey podcast features a well-being key from Dr. Denise, helping you meet your self-care needs for living well. Listener discretion is advised because this and other Hope for the Journey episodes may contain discussions surrounding behavioral health problems and other actual potentially triggering topics.
Hello, and good day, everyone. I welcome you back to Hope for the Journey, and I really hope things are coming along okay for you today. This is Dr. Denise speaking, and on today's episode of the podcast, I will be talking about reading spiritual things, which is a spiritual self-care key for living well. In my work as an adjunct health and wellness professor in the United States, one of the graduate level courses I have been fortunate to have been teaching is called Spiritual Formation, Identity, and Wellness. Reading spiritual things is an aspect of growing or formation of a spiritual life in service of developing one's spiritual identity or makeup. That is the substance of who you are in the world. And reading spiritual things is also something that is strengthening of your wellness on a spiritual level. So to set some groundwork for today's topic in this field of spiritual wellness, I would like to review a little bit about what are called the 8 dimensions of human wellness, or as I like to call them, 8 keys to human well-being. I am not sure how familiar you are with these categories of wellness, but I would like to review each of them because they are important to today's topic of spiritual wellness. The first category of spiritual wellness dimensions is physical wellness. And in each of my podcasts, I do talk a little bit about several health foods and plants that can add, assuming your doctor's approval, to your physical well-being and even more. So this is the important dimension of physical wellness. There is also emotional wellness. And I have actually some relevant content in my podcast number 1, which I call the self-image checkup, touching on emotional well-being. Then there is the dimension called intellectual wellness or thought wellness. In my second podcast on observing your thinking, the focus of the content is on the importance to one's overall well-being of having a healthy thinking mind. There are also the wellness dimensions of occupational well-being and financial wellness, financial well-being. Plus, there is the dimension of social wellness. And I did open up this relational self-care key in my third podcast, which is called Needing Some Space. Because we all do need in our days some space from what goes on in our close relationships. There is also the important dimension the key of environmental wellness. And also in this podcast, which I recorded about needing some space, I pointed out the benefit of time spent in quiet spaces each day. And the last of these key wellness dimensions is spiritual wellness. So today's episode, entitled Reading Spiritual Things, is an example of a topic in this area of spiritual wellness. And you might be wondering, where are the best places to begin reading spiritual things? One good place to start is to read or even listen to the words of fine spiritual teachers. You might be wondering which spiritual teachers to turn to. I'd like to start by naming 7 of them, and perhaps these are for your sampling over 7 months of the year. One fine spiritual teacher who needs no introduction is Mother Teresa, our beloved missionary of charity. Then there is Father Stephen Valenta, who was a very popular Franciscan and American spiritual director who actually has videos on YouTube. Then we have Saint Faustina, who was a nun from Poland who penned a diary which is now called and sold as Divine Mercy in My Soul. It is a modern-day classic book to read, a spiritual classic. Of course, Saint Francis of Assisi should be familiar to almost everyone because some people say he is the most loved of all of the saints. Then there is Father Jacques Philippe. He is another very popular spiritual director, plus an author and speaker from France. And he also has videos on YouTube. Then there is the doctor, Saint Teresa of Avila. Santa Teresa is a famous Spanish Carmelite nun, spiritual director, writer, and reformer, who is still loved by many today. And for the final teacher on my list of 7, we have the Doctor Saint Therese, the Little Flower. She is the nun from France who has the unusual distinction of being the daughter of 2 saints, Saint Louis Martin, or as they say in France, Saint Louis Martin, and also Zélie Martin, who is in France, Zélie Martin. Therese, Saint Therese, the Little Flower, is another Carmelite, and she is one of the most loved saints in our modern times. Her spiritual teachings emphasize what has come to be known as the little way, or focusing on the path of trust in, surrender to, and love for the higher power who is perfect love. Once you get to know some things about these 7 teachers, you will be able to tell which one or more of them appeal to you and consider what spiritual writings to open yourself up to for a closer look. So it is a good idea to go with that sense of developing interest in the teacher and to go on from there. And by the way, each of these spiritual writers has fascinating life stories to look at, and you might also want to go in that direction for some more spiritual reading. Now, besides these 7 fine spiritual teachers, a second good place to start is to read and/or even listen to the beautiful words about love that are present in the Gospel of John, which is a book of the New Testament in the Bible. John the Apostle certainly is a very fine spiritual teacher and writer. A third good place to begin is to read and/or even listen to the stories of the lives of spiritually strong men and spiritually strong women, like David and Esther. David is the famous shepherd king. Esther is a woman of brave love. Noah is the heroic man of humble foresight. Then there is Joseph with his coat of many colors and a whole lot more. And we have Moses, the celebrated liberator of slaves. And we have St. Paul, who I like to call a man for all seasons. And there are those revealed in the Acts of the Apostles. Now, all of these very spiritually capable men and women from the Bible are each inspirational, to say the least. Yet, perhaps rather than biographical type of reading about the lives of these heroes and heroines, maybe you feel more attracted to specifically Bible books that are focused on gaining wisdom for living. So, a fourth good place to begin is to read and/or even listen to one of the books of poems, songs, and wise sayings in the Bible, especially the Psalms. Now, the Psalms are also, which may be a surprise to some people, very helpful for emotional wellness strengthening. And it is possible, rather than try to take in the large number of Psalms, to focus on subsets of the Psalms on different sub-themes. So you might be able to pick up a little book of the Psalms, for example, that may focus on lamenting or sorrow. And certainly that can be helpful when one is dealing with strong emotions of sadness. Then, besides the Psalms, there is the book of Proverbs, which I would also recommend for strengthening intellectual wellness, because as you've probably noticed in some of my podcasts so far, I have noted Proverbs as a book where very specific proverbs can help in bringing about a strengthening in one's life. Now, it is interesting that the subject matter of reading and or listening to spiritual writings can connect to the third podcast I have posted about needing some space. And this connection can go on in the following way. Most commonly, to really get the most out of spiritual reading, a personal, quiet space to do so is needed. So you may wish to use a little of that daily space time that I have recommended to do a reading of spiritual things. In this way, you would actually be doubling up, so to speak, with both a relational self-care key and a spiritual self-care key for living well. The bottom line about today's topic of reading spiritual things is this: the words of fine spiritual teachers nourish spiritual wellness. Now, I wanted to turn for a bit to a set of examples of people who engage regularly in reading spiritual things. The first person that I have in mind is American actress Jennifer Garner. Jennifer Garner has been a lover of reading books since childhood, and her own Instagram feed at jennifer.garner has actually been a source of spiritual inspiration for her well over 12 million followers. And her Instagram account has even included prayers and meditations connected to faith leaders. As another example of someone who regularly engages in reading spiritual things, I have called to mind American musician Michael W. Smith. Michael W. Smith is himself a book writer and really loves the New Testament Gospels. He has shared a good number of aspects of his spiritual life on his Instagram account at MWSmithOfficial. So I think from what I have just reviewed about Jennifer Garner and Michael W. Smith, you can tell that both of them, in their reading of spiritual things, find a fine source of nutrients for ongoing well-being in their lives. Now, in my pondering of which music to talk about today in support of the reading of good spiritual things, I recalled my own discovery of the many spiritual songs of John Michael Talbot. For those who are not familiar with John Michael Talbot, he is an American Christian musician, author, television presenter, and the founder of a monastic community in the United States known as the Brothers and Sisters of Charity. John is a man highly influenced by the spiritual life of one of the 7 fine spiritual teachers who I covered earlier in today's podcast, and that is St. Francis of Assisi. And this Franciscan impact on John Michael's spiritual life, and actually his life in general, shows up in a good number of John Michael's albums, such as within the album called Troubadour of the King. For example, this album of John Michael Talbot contains the spiritually soothing songs named Brother Sun and Sister Moon, and the song called The Praises of the Virtues. And these pieces of music reveal some of what John Michael has gained of spiritual wellness from his reading the writings of St. Francis. And because of John Michael Talbot's readiness to apply what he has learned from regularly reading the writings of fine spiritual teachers like St. Francis, John Michael has been living a full life of strong well-being with others. To encourage you at this point in today's podcast toward more care for you and your spiritual wellness, I have the following to present: a set of health foods and plants that can relate to today's spiritual self-care key of reading spiritual things. And of course, each of these health foods and plants is for asking your doctor about in advance of turning yourself into a new herbal experiment. So I bring up these health foods and plants today in the pursuit of what I would like to call spiritual beauty. So first I have to mention regular anise seeds. These can be easily used in the form of a warming and aromatic tea, a tea that you could set alongside yourself for drinking while you are reading good spiritual writings. Then I'd like to mention mint. Mint has a nice number of ways to be included in a health routine, also as a tea. And mint tea not only smells lovely, but it is also spiritually uplifting. And then there is ginger. Ginger can serve as a bit of a pick-me-up in one's day, whether it is consumed in little pieces or served as a tea. Each of these three herbs, mint, anise seeds, and ginger, contain sources of benefit, though again it is best to discuss these health foods and plants with your doctor. I am indicating them here as gifts to be considered on your journey toward bringing out more of the spiritual side of you. I also have something brief to share with you today. I have written up this post-it, a post-it note, to help you enter into the practice of reading good spiritual things. I hope you will take to heart these words from a friend. Actually, it's from Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure. Next, there is an extra item that I plan to bring up today, a phone app, one that can be evaded in efforts toward reading good spiritual writings regularly. And this app is called The Word Among Us. The Word Among Us is a fine quality daily devotional app. It provides a selection of spiritually uplifting articles, Bible verses, hero and heroine stories, personal testimonies, plus more things of potential interest to you. And besides this particular app called The Word Among Us, you can also bear in mind that there are other directions to help available in our Hope for the Journey podcast resource center, located on Instagram at Cause for Hope. Of course, I wanted to finish up this podcast by letting you know how much I appreciate the opportunity to spend virtual time alongside you today, especially to offer tips about the valuable matter of reading spiritual things. And please know that I personally wish you more hope for the journey of greater well-being.
The Hope for the Journey program airs weekday evenings from 7:45 p.m. to 8:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Instagram and YouTube. Dr. Denise thanks you for listening to her Community Wellness podcast and wishes you to keep in mind that there is cause for hope of more well-being.